What you're about to see has never happened outside Buckingham Palace. In front of hundreds of cameras, former US President Donald Trump walked straight toward a royal guard and demanded he move. But the royal guard didn't blink, didn't even look at his direction. Trump said the words, "You don't know who I am." But what happened next left everyone in stunned silence. Why didn't the guard move? Why didn't anyone stop Trump from crossing the line? This moment nearly broke decades of royal protocol. And the world learned what true discipline looks like. Watch closely. Trump's standing inches away. And the guard still doesn't move an inch. What followed proved him wrong in the most unforgettable way. Now, before we reveal the full story, make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. You won't believe how this confrontation ended. The forecourt of Buckingham Palace shimmered in the late morning light, a rare patch of calm between the changing of shifts. Tourists gathered behind the black railing, murmuring, snapping photos, whispering about who might be arriving next. The faint rustle of flags above the gate mixed with the steady rhythm of ceremonial boots striking the marble. Sergeant Alexander Wren, Grenadier Guard, stood motionless at his post beside the north archway. His uniform, scarlet tunic pressed sharp, buttons aligned with mathematical precision, tall bearskin hat, solid black, caught the sunlight in soft gleams. He had been on post since dawn, the weight of the rifle against his shoulder as familiar as his own heartbeat. Just beyond the gates, a small convoy of black vehicles rolled up. The crowd stirred, cameras rose. When the rear door opened, Donald J. Trump, former President of the United States, stepped out with a practiced half-smile and a quick wave to the press. He was not on the official schedule. The palace had been told a private guest might arrive, but no one expected the spectacle of photographers and aides fanning out like a travelling stage. Trump glanced across the courtyard, squinting at the single unmoving figure standing square in the camera's line. He frowned. "Tell him to move," he said, gesturing toward the guard. "He's blocking my shot." One of his aides hesitated. "Sir, that's—" "I said move him," Trump repeated, louder this time, his voice bouncing off the pale stone walls. But the guard didn't flinch. Wren's eyes stayed fixed ahead, the ceremonial stillness unbroken. Trump walked closer, his shoes tapping against the marble until he was nearly at the rope line. The cameras followed, eager. He tilted his head, peering up at the motionless soldier. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Silence. The crowd went quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Trump waited a beat, then chuckled, the sound brittle in the open air. "That's all right," he muttered. "You'll remember soon enough." But still, no reaction. A single click echoed, the adjustment of Wren's rifle grip as his fingers returned to rest position. That was all. Behind the railings, a tourist whispered, "He's not even blinking." Another voice murmured, "They're trained for that." Cameras flashed. Trump straightened his jacket, but something in the air had shifted. His smile faltered. The crowd sensed it too, a tension that hadn't existed moments ago. And beneath the fluttering Union Jack, Sergeant Alexander Wren stood unmoved, the still point in a field of noise. Sergeant Alexander Wren had stood sentry in all weathers, sleet, wind, and blistering summer heat. But he often said that the hardest thing to stand through was disrespect. Not because of pride, but because it tested the very code that made the uniform sacred: silence, restraint, and service before self. He had learned that code the hard way. Years before, in a dusty Afghan outpost, Wren had once snapped at a young private for stepping out of formation under stress. His commanding officer had pulled him aside afterward and said, "Anyone can shout, Wren, but a real leader can command without raising his voice." That line stayed with him, as had his father's words from long before the uniform. "You never need to remind people who you are. Let your conduct do that." Those words returned now, faint but solid, as he kept his stance before the palace gate. The marble heat pressed through his boots, the rifle's barrel warm against his glove, the bearskin hat heavy and still. Trump's aides shuffled uncertainly nearby. The crowd, sensing friction, grew quiet in that curious, anticipatory way only London crowds could. Polite but alert, drawn to tension like a slow-forming storm. Trump turned toward his photographer. "He's really not going to move." The photographer shook his head gently. "He's part of the ceremony, sir. They don't react." Trump's eyebrows rose, faintly amused and faintly offended. "We'll see about that." He adjusted his tie, flashing a smile toward the press, but his jaw was tight. The cameras caught every motion, the contrast between movement and stillness, ego and duty. Inside the palace courtyard, Captain Ellis, the officer overseeing the Morning Post, watched from the shadows of the archway. He knew that look on Wren's face, calm surface, locked focus. It was the kind of composure only built over years of swallowing one's own reactions. Ellis murmured to the corporal beside him, "If that man thinks he can command a sentry, he's in for a lesson." The corporal exhaled softly. "Should we intervene, sir?" "Not yet," Ellis replied. "Let the guard do what the guard does best." Out in the open, the air thickened with a quiet expectation. Trump straightened his jacket again, his entourage edging behind him. The camera shutters fluttered like distant applause, and still the guard did not move. Trump adjusted his cufflinks with that deliberate impatience of a man used to motion, planes waiting, cameras flashing, doors opening. Yet here, before Buckingham Palace's North Forecourt, the world refused to move for him. The guard's stillness was a mirror, and in it, Trump saw no reflection of control. He turned to his aide, a young man in a navy suit already sweating under the June sun. "He's ruining the shot," Trump said flatly. "Get him to step aside." The aide hesitated. "Sir, I believe he's not allowed to—" "Then command him!" Trump snapped. "This is ridiculous." The aide looked helplessly toward a palace liaison, an older British official in mourning dress, standing discreetly near the archway. The liaison stepped forward with the patience of a man who had diffused too many diplomatic fires. "Mr. Trump, the guard is on duty under ceremonial order. He cannot move without his officer's direction," the liaison said in a tone balanced between courtesy and firmness. Trump's mouth twitched. "Then get his officer." Before the liaison could respond, one of Trump's own security men, a tall, broad American in dark glasses, took a step past the rope barrier. The crowd's murmurs deepened into a soft, collective intake of breath. The man's shoe tapped the stone just inches inside the ceremonial line. It seemed nothing, just a step. But for those who understood the tradition, it was the first breach. The guard's right hand, still gloved, shifted almost imperceptibly along his rifle's stock. It wasn't a threat, it was protocol. A warning. The air froze. Even the birds circling the palace towers seemed to stop mid-flight. Trump's security man looked back at him, uncertain. Trump frowned, gesturing irritably. "He's a soldier, not a statue. Just tell him to move 2 feet. 2 feet!" Wren did not flinch. His breathing stayed measured, shallow, contained behind the fixed stare. Captain Ellis had seen this before, from the archway, watching silently. This was the line between theatre and tradition. The moment where the uniform ceased to be cloth and became an institution. The aide looked trapped between two worlds. "Sir," he whispered to Trump, "we're on palace grounds. There are rules." Trump muttered, "Rules? Ridiculous. I could buy this whole place." But the words sounded thinner now, hanging in the marble stillness. Somewhere behind the rope line, a tourist's phone shutter clicked. The sound rang like a gavel. Trump looked again at the motionless guard, the black bearskin towering above unblinking eyes, the rifle held in immaculate vertical line. That silence. It wasn't defiance, it was something older, deeper, the silence of an oath being honoured. Trump shifted his weight. The smile returned to his lips, but not to his eyes. "Fine," he said through his teeth. "Let's see how long he lasts." The guard didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't breathe any louder. The silence held, and in that silence power began to tilt. The tension in the forecourt had settled into something almost visible, a still, heavy air that pressed between marble and sun. The reporters had stopped pretending to adjust their lenses. The tourists had stopped whispering. All eyes followed the single tableau, a motionless guard, a restless former president, and the empty stretch of stone between them. Trump shifted, the polished leather of his shoes creaking as he turned toward the palace liaison again. "So this is how you treat guests now? You think this makes your country look strong?" The liaison started to speak, but before he could, a clear, trembling voice rose from behind the rope line. "Sir," it called out, "that man's standing for all of us. Please, let him do his duty." Heads turned. The voice belonged to an elderly woman, dressed neatly though plainly, a grey coat despite the warmth, a string of medals pinned to her lapel. Her hair was silver, pinned in soft curls, her face drawn but dignified. Trump blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "Who said that?" The woman lifted her chin. "I did. My husband wore that same uniform 40 years ago." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. The crowd turned toward her, the press lenses shifting with mechanical precision to capture her lined face. She went on, her tone neither pleading nor confrontational. "He stood his post through snow and jeers and noise because he believed silence was a kind of respect. That man's just doing the same." For a fleeting moment, no one spoke. Even the Secret Service agent who'd stepped forward earlier froze mid-motion, eyes flicking from the woman to Trump. The former president gave a short, stiff laugh, somewhere between discomfort and disbelief. "I'm not disrespecting anyone, I'm just—" "Then let him be," she said gently. "If you respect him, let him be." Behind her, a few in the crowd nodded, murmuring in quiet agreement. The atmosphere shifted. What had been curiosity was turning into something like quiet defense. From the archway, Captain Ellis stepped forward now, his hands clasped behind his back. His tone was calm, precise. "Mr. Trump, if you'd like to proceed inside, we can redirect the press line along the south gate. It'll be much quicker, sir." Trump turned his head, a flash of irritation behind his eyes. "No, I just want to see if he even knows who he's standing in front of." The crowd's murmur dimmed again, replaced by the faint creak of the guard's leather strap as Wren adjusted his hold, still silent, still steady. Somewhere behind the rope, a child asked his mother, "Why won't he talk?" The mother whispered back, "Because that's not what he's there for." And the palace forecourt, for all its grandeur, felt suddenly intimate, one man's silence now holding the weight of an entire tradition. Captain Ellis stood precisely at the edge of the ceremonial line, neither confronting nor conceding. He had seen foreign dignitaries misunderstand protocol before, but never one who seemed to take silence as a personal challenge. "Mr. Trump," Ellis began in the careful tone of someone trained to diffuse tension without appearing to yield, "the guard serves the crown, not individuals. He will not respond to instruction outside the chain of command." Trump's gaze snapped toward him. Even to a world leader, Ellis didn't blink, especially to one. A ripple passed through the crowd, the kind that hums low before it breaks into whispers. Cameras clicked in staccato bursts, catching the two men framed in symmetry, the still guard and the American statesman, his hand frozen mid-gesture. Trump forced a tight smile, the kind made for damage control. "You people take this act very seriously, don't you?" Ellis kept his tone even. "It isn't an act, sir. It's duty." The remark landed softly, but Trump's face stiffened. He took a slow step forward, closer to the rope that separated ceremony from spectacle. The crowd's hum turned brittle. Wren didn't move. The rifle stayed at its perfect vertical line, his chin lifted, eyes locked to the horizon beyond the marble arch. Trump's shoe brushed the rope. 1 inch farther, and he would breach it. Ellis's voice cut through the air, not loud, but resonant. "Sir, I must advise you not to cross that boundary." Trump smirked. "What happens if I do? And he going to arrest me?" The British officer didn't smile. "No, sir. He will stand his ground." And in that instant, Trump took the step. It was small, a single shift forward, just enough to test. Just enough to say, "I can." The movement of the guard was almost imperceptible. A shift of the left boot heel, a subtle tightening of the shoulder. His gloved hand slid along the rifle's stock with the precision of a clock hand moving to the next minute mark. A soundless pause followed. Even the camera shutters faltered. For the tourists, it looked like nothing. For those who knew the ritual, it meant everything. Ellis gave one quiet command, almost a whisper. Stand fast. Wren froze again, his muscles locked into posture, his breath anchored low. Trump looked from the motionless figure to the officer. So that's it? He's not even allowed to… Ellis interrupted gently. He's allowed to serve, sir. That's all. The wind moved through the courtyard, tugging faintly at the flag above. The sound of it, soft, constant, was louder than any word spoken. Wren's perspective narrowed to rhythm. 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale. He felt the heat under his collar, the faint sting of sweat at his temple, the steady weight of the rifle. He had endured longer silences before, funerals, memorials, moments when the only right response was stillness. Now that same stillness was his answer again. Trump's jaw flexed. He looked around, realizing for the first time that every camera lens had shifted off him and onto the guard who refused to move. The power in the courtyard had changed hands, and no one had said a single word. The marble underfoot seemed to hum with the tension between them. Trump lingered within the ceremonial boundary, his reflection glimmering faintly in the polished rifle's barrel. The courtyard had gone utterly still. Even the soft murmur of the flag's fabric seemed to fall silent. He gave a short laugh, but it didn't sound natural. So, that's it? You're just going to stand there? Not even a nod? No reply. Trump circled a little, slow, deliberate, keeping just far enough not to brush against the guard's bayonet, but close enough that his shadow fell over Wren's boots. You don't even know who I am, do you? He said, voice low, but it carried across the open space. Stillness. Wren's eyes didn't move. They fixed at that invisible horizon point just above the man's shoulder. Inside his mind, he counted the rhythm of his breath. The familiar silent mantra of service drilled into every guardsman. Stand still, stand firm. You are the wall. Trump chuckled again, forced, theatrical. Say something, anything. Still, nothing. From behind the rope line, the elderly widow clasped her hands. She whispered to a nearby tourist, "He won't, that's his honour." Her voice reached the microphone. Reporters glanced up from their viewfinders, realizing they were witnessing something larger than embarrassment, a moment of tradition quietly holding against ego. Captain Ellis, watching with a soldier's patience, exhaled through his nose and stepped forward one measured pace. His boots clicked sharply on the stone. "Permission to speak, Sergeant." The guard's voice came low and contained, like steel being drawn through cloth. "Granted, sir." Every head turned. It was the first sound Sergeant Alexander Wren had made all morning. Ellis's voice stayed calm, clipped. "Identify your post." Wren turned his head just an inch, precise, deliberate. "North Forecourt, ceremonial watch, by order of His Majesty." A pause. Even the tourists seemed to hold their breath. Then Ellis added softly, "And do you know who stands before you, Sergeant?" Wren's jaw flexed once beneath the high collar. His answer came measured, firm, each word balanced on the edge between deference and dignity. "Yes, sir, we know exactly who stands before us." A beat. "That's why we remain." The words fell into the open air like a weight. They weren't defiant, they were absolute. Trump froze. His eyes darted between Wren and Ellis, searching for some hint of irony, but there was none. Only the stillness of men performing a duty older than the office he once held. Somewhere, a phone clicked a photo, the frame catching Wren's unflinching eyes beneath the towering black bearskin, the gilded palace behind him, and Trump's hand mid-air, caught between retort and retreat. The crowd was hushed. Even the Secret Service men had lowered their posture slightly, uncertain whether to intervene or to simply observe. Trump opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. Whatever comeback had risen to his lips dissolved before it left them. He stepped back, just one pace, the scuff of his shoe sharp against the stone. Captain Ellis saluted briskly. "Thank you, Sergeant. Resume your post." Wren nodded once, turned crisply on his heel, and faced forward again, immovable, unshaken. The cameras kept flashing, but now the lenses no longer sought Trump's face. They lingered instead on the guard, on the simplicity of the act, the man who had won an argument without uttering a word of challenge. Trump glanced around and realized what had happened. The silence was no longer against him. It had become his teacher. For several long seconds, no one moved. The palace courtyard seemed frozen in amber, a perfect still life of stillness and pride. The only sound came from the faint hum of the flagpole rope clinking softly against brass. Then, like a tide receding, the tension began to ease. The press lenses lowered. Conversations that had been suspended mid-breath began again, hushed and reverent. Across the rope line, the elderly widow stood straighter, eyes glistening. She gave the smallest nod toward the unmoving guard, a gesture of thanks seen by no one but him. Near her, a child whispered, "He didn't even blink." Her reply came in a voice that trembled but held. "That's discipline, love. That's what respect looks like." On the marble forecourt, Trump adjusted his jacket with a jerk, his movements now stiff and uncertain. For a moment, he looked around, to the cameras, to the aides, to the expectant crowd, and seemed to realize that whatever performance he'd intended had already ended without him. He forced a grin, broad and practiced. "Tough guy, huh? That's something," he said to no one in particular. The joke landed flat, carried away by the London breeze. Captain Ellis, still standing beside the line, gave a courteous nod. "If you'll follow me, sir, the reception hall is ready." Trump hesitated, just a heartbeat, then exhaled through his nose and turned toward the archway. The movement of his entourage followed automatically, the murmur of polished shoes scraping on stone. As he passed the guard, Trump slowed. The proximity was close enough for him to hear the faint creak of leather from Wren's strap as he adjusted his stance. Under his breath, barely audible, Trump muttered, "Guess you do know who I am." No answer came, only the ceremonial click of Wren's boot heel repositioning to its proper line. The exchange was brief, unseen by most, but those who witnessed it, the widow, the photographers, the palace aides, would carry it with them. Because, for all the titles and entourages, it was the silence that endured, the kind that didn't humiliate but humbled. As Trump disappeared beneath the archway's shadow, Captain Ellis gave one final glance at the sentry. Wren stood precisely as before, as though nothing had occurred, and maybe, in his world, nothing had. He had simply done what he always did, stand for the crown, for order, for quiet dignity in the face of noise. Behind the rope, the crowd slowly began to clap, not in applause, but as if to release what they'd been holding inside. It was brief, polite and respectful, fading quickly into the soft shuffle of departing footsteps. The cameras captured the last image before the gates closed. A solitary guard beneath the fluttering flag, immovable in the hush he'd restored. The palace corridors were quieter now. Afternoon light spilled through the high windows, painting pale gold over the checkerboard floor. In the distance, faint echoes of the public ceremony still drifted in from the forecourt, the soft rhythm of boots changing shift, the distant murmur of tourists dispersing. Inside the guardroom, Sergeant Alexander Wren sat alone at the long wooden bench, polishing his rifle. His gloves lay neatly folded beside him, his posture still upright, even off post. The ritual of cleaning was both habit and meditation, a way to return to stillness after standing in it. The door opened softly. Captain Ellis stepped in, his cap tucked under one arm. He paused, studying Wren for a moment before speaking. "You all right, Sergeant?" Wren didn't look up immediately. He turned the rifle in his hands, checking the brass catch, then met Ellis's eyes. "Yes, sir. The uniform did its job." Ellis smiled faintly. "And so did the man inside it." Wren said nothing, just nodded once. His expression was unreadable, a surface of calm with something quieter beneath. After a pause, Ellis leaned against the doorframe. "You know," he said, "my father used to tell me there are moments when silence teaches better than command." Wren gave a small, almost invisible smile. "Mine too, sir." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Your father served?" "Grenadier Guard, same regiment," Wren said. "Posted this very gate, 1982. There's a photograph of him in the barrack, greeting the American delegation back then." Ellis nodded. Good man. The best, Wren said softly. He always told me respect isn't given to the man shouting. It's given to the one who doesn't need to. Ellis breathed out through his nose, a quiet sound somewhere between a sigh and pride. He'd have been proud of you today. Wren looked down at the rifle once more, ran the cloth along the barrel until it gleamed. He taught me that the uniform doesn't answer to noise, sir, only to duty. Ellis adjusted his cap, preparing to leave. Well, he said, voice low, you've done that duty proud. When he was gone, Wren remained seated for a moment longer, the soft reflection of the rifle's metal shimmering across his sleeve. Outside, a new sentry took post, and as the palace clock struck the hour, the rhythm of order resumed, seamless, unbroken, as if the silence itself had been restored to its rightful place. By evening, the light above Buckingham Palace had turned soft and amber, and what had begun as a tense confrontation was already becoming a story, passed from voice to voice, post to post, phone to phone. There was no official statement from the palace. There rarely was. The guard did not speak to the press. Captain Ellis refused interviews with the same calm detachment he had shown that morning. But the world outside did what it always does. It filled the silence. Clips began to circulate, first shaky phone footage, then high-resolution frames from the press pool. They showed a single image. Trump stepping forward, the guard immovable, the flag above both men. The caption varied, depending on who shared it, but the sentiment was almost universal. A British soldier reminded the world what dignity looks like. Yet there was no mockery, no outrage, no scandal. Instead, a quiet kind of admiration spread. Not for confrontation, but for composure. News anchors debated the moment without theatrics. One analyst simply said, "There's something powerful about someone who doesn't need to prove they're in control." The palace gates saw more visitors the next day. Not the noisy kind, not those who came for selfies or spectacle, but families, veterans and quiet onlookers who stood for a few minutes and watched the new sentry pacing his post. They all expected to see Sergeant Wren again, but of course the guard rotated daily. Still, a few thought they recognized the posture, the stillness, the exact precision of his stance. And in that stillness, they saw the man everyone had spoken about. At the edge of the rope line, just before the afternoon rain began to fall, the elderly widow returned. In her hand, she carried a single white carnation. She placed it carefully at the base of the rail, between the polished posts, and pinned a small note beneath it. It read simply, "For the man who didn't need to speak." The flower bent gently in the breeze, its petals trembling against the iron. The sentry didn't move, couldn't by duty, but his eyes caught the edge of white at the corner of his vision. He didn't smile, didn't shift, didn't even blink. But the faintest exhale passed through him, quiet, unseen, like gratitude carried on the wind, and the palace forecourt held that silence once more, proud and complete. Dusk settled over Buckingham Palace, in a soft gradient of gold and violet. The flag still fluttered above the roofline, steady in the cooling air. Beneath it, the courtyard gleamed, rain-polished marble reflecting lamplight like molten glass. Sergeant Alexander Wren stood at his post once again. The faint echo of boots, striking stone from the evening rotation, faded behind him. In front, the last of the tourists lingered, their voices hushed, as though the forecourt itself had learned reverence from the man in red. He hadn't spoken since that morning. He wouldn't. He didn't need to. Because sometimes, silence was the loudest answer of all. The camera lingered. The guard framed against the great gates, the city beyond him flickering to life, headlights moving through mist. His shadow stretched long across the stone, merging with the lines of history itself. He never needed to remind anyone who he was, because the way he stood said everything. Now, tell me this. If you were standing in that guard's place, would you have spoken or kept your silence? And do you think real strength shows in words or in discipline? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story reminded you why tradition still matters, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell on. We bring you new Royal Guard stories every single day. And if you haven't yet, check out the other stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that proves honor doesn't need an audience.